Well, Stuart's a little taller than I am. In continuing this whole idea of making learning fun, best practices for making kids' digital content fun and educational, my own background is that I do research and content analysis with a solid foundation in my work in children's literature and picture books in particular. And how does that become fun and educational for the child audience? Well, first I want to show you where it is that I start my work. This is the home library, and I immerse myself in picture books all the time. And through my study of picture books, I really start to look at how it is that we share stories with children in the traditional sense of what we've been doing for generations. But then I look at my own life. How do I make learning fun and educational for me? I hang out at the Apple Store, take one-to-one lessons, and as you can see, at the time that I made this little screen clip, I had taken 100 lessons in that particular year. So I go there a lot, I learn new things, and what is it that draws me into learning something that's fun and educational? And I think those are the kinds of things that we're looking for children as well. I hang out at various technology conferences like this that look at digital materials for children. But currently, I'm immersed in research at the TOCBologna in Berlin. And during these 4 months in which I'm living there as a fellowship recipient, I'm looking at these aspects of visual learning and how it is that we go looking at the book design that we know from the print world, and how do I apply these concepts of how we know that we communicate visually into the app world and the digital world for children. So, with a foundation in learning about how children learn to read and through reading, looking at all this that I've just told you about book design, and also looking at the relationship between the adult and the child as they are reading together, I want to look at that which is engaging, fun, and interesting for me, as well as I believe for the child. Who could resist something like this, in which you have a beautifully designed story and the most charming child voice to tell you the story as you enjoy it too? Without doubt, for me, this is the kind of thing that is engaging and motivating for children as well as for the adults. But also, I want to take a look at the importance of the idea that fun and educational also relies on that which is very much an engagement of the child and the adult. Earlier this morning, perhaps you heard Dominique speak about Sourcebook's new stories in which the child, in fact, does become part of the story. And there's nothing quite like personalizing an experience to make you feel like there's space for you to be a part of the story that's being told. And I think that this whole concept of there being space for you is particularly important in the e-world, because in the picture book world, as we know it, we know that the picture book creators, visually and through text, create spaces for the reader and the child to enter the story. We have various ways of talking about this through telling gaps. We talk about it through the interactions that children and adults have during read aloud. But there's this mistaken notion that the digital world is too closed. That, in other words, there's not enough interactivity between the digital story as being presented. But something like this certainly does. I inserted myself in all these stories about pretending and thinking about what your career could be. So in that same way, you could, again, engage yourself in it. Or in this one, what you see is a little girl who's very engaged with going beyond the story to engage in writing experiences in which she makes choices that then become the story that's ultimately told. Again, children like having a sense of being able to choose, which we heard from our morning speakers over and over this morning. Children want choice. Children want engagement. In the same way here, if you like the Big Nate stories, you too can create your own comics, and it's scaffolded so that the child will be successful. You choose the character, you choose how many blocks you want in it, you choose the dialogue you're going to have, you write your own dialogue, but altogether the scaffolding makes it successful for the children to engage. Then there are all these libraries in which you can have many book choices, so that you can not have to buy each thing one by one as we do in the app world, but rather you can go into a library and through subscriptions typically, you can have many things that you have access to. Again, in the whole library mindset that we've all grown up with, we want children to have the option to be able to choose. and to have many things to select from. But in today's world, we're looking more at things that are developed that are not just about the book as it's told in the e-form, but rather stories that are being told not necessarily through the print media that we knew it before, but through a different way of telling stories in today's world. The one on the left-hand side is from Magic Town, and the one on the right-hand side is from Reading Rainbow, Are Our Kids. We also want options for children that are very interactive. So things like this in which the child spins the globe with a finger, finds a country to land on, pops on it to find out more information. Very interactive. The child is in control in a sense of making the decisions and then learns information through it. Or ones like this in which the traditional book, the print book, was more linearly presented. Now you can access information in a non-linear way by accessing and making choices and clicking. You find yourself in this interrelated, woven way of getting information. We can't say enough about the really big delights for an international audience, such as here at Bologna, which is the notion of translation, and how much easier it is today to do it. But I also want to caution all of us, if we want our readers to be engaged and motivated, they have to know that the language in which it's translated is, in fact, well done in their mother tongue, in a way that is how storytellers in their language tell their stories. Not just an adult who happens to speak that language, but rather one in which we have natural storytelling happening. I did a whole presentation last year on the aesthetic experience, and so I'll only summarize it here by saying we who are in the picture book design world highly value the aesthetic experiences that we offer for children. And we don't want to mistake one for the other. We don't want to even show necessarily that there are always these equivalents, but what we want to look for is making choices for our students and our children that really lets them highlight the best of what we can find in each one. So, frankly for me, little books for little hands, as Beatrix Potter intended, were beautifully created as art forms as they were. I like the idea that books have different shapes, because shapes help tell the story. And the shape of the book is particularly different depending on the story that's being told. But then there are some books in which I think I can imagine hearing the sound, I can imagine feeling the motion of the boat rocking. I can imagine that instead of just statically seeing the cover of this book, in which Tom Feelings has very cleverly placed me, the reader, in the boat with the others, suddenly I might find myself even rocking to the movement of the boat and feeling the motion of the waves and interactively being brought into the horrendous experience that the middle passage was. Definitely a picture book for adults and for older students, not for the youngest of children. One thing I think about a lot is that this is one field in which predominantly adults are making decisions about children's materials. And some people criticize it and say children should have more voice about what they are choosing. And I think to some degree that's very true. We want children to have an ability to make choices. However, as I say at the bottom, it is our responsibility as adults. And it's always been interesting to me that when it comes to nutrition, adults are sure that they don't just walk the children into a store and say, what would you like us to buy for your groceries this week? You would like 10 boxes of cookies? Great. How many things of ice cream should we get? No, instead we as adults have a sense of what's nutritionally good for our children, and then we offer them some choices within those nutritional ones. And in the same way, I hope that while we're looking at things that are fun and educational for our children, that we balance that which is educational but not didactic, fun but still within what we know to be appropriate. We want to distinguish between that which is entirely game-like, and I think it was Christian earlier who said you don't want it to become so game-like that you lose sense of where you're headed with it in terms of the purpose of it. Research coming out on the disruptive nature of some aspects of digital. So, in keeping all of that in mind, we want to remember that we are looking for that which is fun and educational for our children, but ultimately for me, as a person who has a grounding in the print world, as well as a fun draw into the digital world, I want to remember the distinction between what things are actually done better in the digital world that print alone cannot readily do, and at the same time, keep in mind that there are some things that the print world does really well, and the digital world may in fact offer limitations. Thank you for your time today, and I want to end with a little spot of humor because I found this little icon that popped up on my screen one day, and I thought it was very funny. Book, what is this? And there's a little information button that I can click on to find out what a book is. I wonder if someday we're going to get into this, but I certainly hope not in my lifetime. Thank you very much.